Hey everybody, get your best headphones out. We're about to start a little bit of a drama, most likely. I have never rewritten a script so often as this one, but there is no nice way to say this. I don't think the music in Last Epoch is good. And today I will try to explain why that is, in hopefully a way that at least makes some sense. So it's not the most important topic in the world, but it's also not something that you really hear anyone talking about, and I think I have a decent perspective on this, so I thought I will make a video. People will say that music is subjective. It is, in terms of what you enjoy, and I'm not claiming a fully objective view here, but I will be talking about how the music functions in Last Epoch and not so much about which tracks I like or dislike. At the end of the day, it is still subjective, but hopefully you can follow my reasoning and line of thought here, and then you can agree or disagree. And with this in mind, let's get started. Around a year ago, March 2020, I made a video where I said the music was mistimed and misplaced. The devs agreed and said they were working on it. Last patch, 16 new tracks were added. 4 of those explicitly got posted on the Last Epoch YouTube account. And it seems they're content with it, right? Otherwise, why would you do that? Unfortunately, this hasn't changed my opinion. If anything, after listening to the new tracks, I am more convinced that there are massive issues with the music in Last Epoch. The first issue is that very often the music doesn't fit with whatever is going on inside the game. The second issue is that there is no overall cohesive theme to the music, and I want to address these issues. Issue number 1. Very often, the music doesn't fit with whatever is going on inside the game. This was true more than a year ago, and while some improvements have been made, it is still true very often today. And I'm specifically talking about 2 different situations here, starting with the one that has to do with literally events in the game, like for example opening a beacon echo. The in-game music isn't aware of these events, it doesn't respond to them. Let me pull up an example here from Path of Exile. I think it's a great example of what I would like to see in Last Epoch. I'm currently just in a map and there is music playing. If I now start any sort of event in the map, for example a Legion encounter or a Blight encounter, the music picks up on that.
Divine power! Divine power!
It does that seamlessly. It's not in your face, but it is definitely noticeable, and usually it uses a crossfade. The gaming experience while playing an event is elevated by the music, which intensifies as does the action, and when the event is over the music dies down and returns to the default music in the map. This way you are getting audio-visual cues about in-game events. It's a well put together harmonious experience where the music complements the gameplay like it should. Now watch, but mostly listen, what happens when starting the encounter in the beacon echo. Nothing is the answer. The music just keeps playing. It's completely unaware of an event like this, which is literally triggered by a player action. And I think that is a real shame, because you just saw how much music matters in short burst events like this, and how much it can do for the experience of the whole event. Without music picking up on the beacon event, which spawns in tons of monsters and is one of the most action-packed experiences in the monolith up to date, this whole experience remains a somewhat bland affair. Technically, implementing this into Last Epoch should be fairly easy. You just have to build a trigger that cues in the music and you're off to the races. It's already done in the dragon fight in the divine side areas, where music does indeed follow an in-game event when you encounter the ancient dragon for the first time. That's the first situation. The second situation is rather different. This is the overall problem that, in my opinion at least, the music in Last Epoch simply doesn't fit an ARPG and whatever themes Last Epoch is about. That is subjective, that is true, but I think there is a little bit more to it than this, and I'll try to get into that, right? So you may enjoy listening to the soundtrack while playing the game, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it makes sense in the game's context. This is, I feel, an important distinction to make here, because I enjoy listening to modern jazz or EDM while grinding PoE, but that doesn't mean it would be fitting for the game. I just don't really understand how a lot of the sad, melancholic music fits into Last Epoch. I very much enjoy it, and I think it is sensible in particularly the earlier parts of the game where you are introduced to the world. It's a beautiful environment, and the songs accompany you walking across these zones. But that is a very small part of the game these days. The large majority is a pessimistic, broken world filled with void where you're slaying countless monsters. If I listen to these tracks, I don't think about that. I think about sad apocalyptic movies like The Road, or I think of a very personal drama or some ominous indie movie. Or I think about one of those lonely indie games, pretty much walking simulators like Journey. And now that the tracks are out on YouTube, you can do this exercise, right? Just forget for a moment that these are the Last Epoch tracks. Listen to them, and then what do you imagine is happening on screen? You killing 100 monsters in the snow? I was playing Edge of Eternity the other day, exploring the lands on my Neckaroo, and then this music played in the background. This sounds very similar to the Last Epoch sad music theme, right? Very much the same vibe, but here it makes a lot of sense because this is a rather peaceful environment, first of all, and it also happens after a cataclysmic event. It's a beautiful environment, it's very hopeful, but you can also tell we haven't completely overcome all challenges just yet. This is a game about exploration and storytelling, and it makes sense, right, with a soundtrack like this. Last Epoch, you could argue, has those elements, but it is mainly a game about killing monsters. The music, however, suggests otherwise. It lacks a sense of urgency. It lacks the properties that fit well with an action-packed game, like higher tempo songs, more drums and percussion, that sort of thing. Instead, we got a weeping piano tune. This brings me neatly to the second and final issue. Issue number 2, there is no overall cohesive theme to the music in Last Epoch. If I'm listening to all the tracks that Last Epoch has produced so far, and last patch they added 16 additional tracks, I don't get the impression that this was written by a single composer. And maybe it wasn't. The music lacks a recognizable style. There must be at least 30 or 40 tracks by now, but if you would listen to all of them, which I have for hours in preparation of this video, you wouldn't find a common theme across the songs. Other games are doing a much better job here, PoE included, but I will give a different example this time. I'm going to give you Skyrim. When dissecting Skyrim's music, you can clearly hear a coherent landscape of sounds and melodies that help you get immersed into Skyrim as you are exploring the game. There are roughly 3 types of music available. The first is your exploration music. These are beautiful tracks, all within the same sort of ethereal vibe. They each carry a distinct melody that separates the tracks, and they play when you walk the endless plains of Skyrim's open world. The coherent feel is created by using largely the same instruments, and using largely the same tones, and the same rhythms, and the same tempo. The Skyrim exploration music is slow-paced, it's drawn out, with a lot of strings playing these melodies, accompanied by similar chords. There is the occasional horn to mix it up from time to time and provide gravitas to the tracks, but overall the scores fit together across the various types of landscapes, from swamps, lush plains to misty snowy mountains. The second piece of music is combat music. The overall tone differs a lot from the first category, of course, because now we're in combat, right? But there are plenty of combat tracks and boss tracks and tracks for the more action-packed parts of the game, and these are once again coherent. You can clearly tell they are from the same game. All of these tracks are more epic, with a male choir singing, and you get this kind of Viking feel almost when they're about to raid a village, which makes a lot of sense, right, given the setting of Skyrim. The strings from the first category have moved very much to the background, drums and percussion enter the fray, there's much more horns and trumpets and whatnot, but this overall theme is once again the same between the various battle songs. And it's important to realize that there are certain elements that are universal across all of the Skyrim songs, battle or not, in particular the instruments used, the chord progression and some of the melodies that keep coming back. Looking at a game closer to Last Epoch, in this case once again Path of Exile, it has this same coherent feeling existing over there, across for example the bosses, but then with angelic female voices that provide the main themes against a bombastic, epic, apocalyptic chord progression, really fitting boss fights like Elder and Cirrus and Maven. Path of Exile achieves this because the composer keeps using the same themes and he uses similar but distinct melodies to separate the tracks. You can clearly tell the difference between Elder, Cirrus and Maven soundtracks, but you can also clearly tell it is from the same game, because it has a lot in common. The Elder songs has this pumping bass, right? It's probably a synthesizer, with quick strings on top of it, creating a sense of urgency and of tension. And then the main melody is played by an organ and more strings. Now listen to Cirrus. It's the same idea, right? Pumping bass, fast strings. Now we have a female choir that does the job. I'm pretty sure this is in the same key and it's using similar but clearly distinct melodies. Maven may sound different, more futuristic, as Maven is from another plane in the universe of PoE, the precursor of what is to come, but still you have the same patterns here, the same tempo, the same sort of chords. Even the calmer parts are very ominous and the female choir is back again for another epic melody. As a small side thing, note the gliding strings and wood instruments. This is a hallmark of the PoE soundtracks. You hear that a lot, as if like bending a guitar string, but then the other way around. It's like meow. I really hope that you sort of start to get an understanding of what I'm trying to explain. And you might ask, like, why is it so important to have this in the same key with the same chords, the same instruments largely? Well, it really helps in multiple ways, because most songs are in the same key or at least use the same tones, right? They use the same chords and all of that. It will be much easier to mix and match the music and have it played during separate events. If everything is written in different keys with different chords, making a smooth transition when popping a Legion, for example, is going to be very difficult. And the composer of Path of Exile, he understands this, right? He chooses for simplistic melodies in a lot of ways, making the song similar to some extent, and that is exactly a good thing. We're not listening to a Queen Greatest Hits album here where you may want some variety and you can appreciate an outlier in the songs like Bohemian Rhapsody or Barcelona. No, it's background music ultimately. This is a very important distinction. It should to a large extent not stand out. It should complement the game, not separate itself from it. And this brings me to the third category of the songs that do stand out quite a bit, but that makes total sense in the given environment. These are not coherent songs in that sense, but they have a good reason for that. You need to be very careful with this, because you run the risk of losing that coherent theme. For example, in Skyrim we have this song, it's called The Bannered Mare. It's a song played on a lute, I think, and the Bannered Mare is an inn. This is where you hear that song, and it's played by an NPC in Skyrim, usually a bard, and it makes total sense. Because once again, it helps you immerse yourself in the game and you get this feeling you're in some sort of medieval adventure, sipping a beer before you go out and slay dragons, enjoying the lavish ambience of a bar. And that's exactly what you are about to do. Now that you hopefully have a bit of a better understanding of what I'm trying to get at, if you now look at Last Epoch, what do we see? Or better, what do we hear? Last Epoch to some extent has clusters or themes that recur, similar to the categories I just described in Skyrim. A very common theme has these strings that play short bursts of chords, some overlying strings with longer notes, and then there's the piano tune, which is usually a very melancholic, slow melody. It has a certain sadness to it, as if the protagonist is about to kill himself. There is some ominous feeling to it as well, a feeling of mystery. If you listen to the tracks playing in the end of time, all hope is pretty much lost. I think these are beautiful tracks, by the way. It is, however, about what emotions they're conveying, and this is what these tones indicate. That is what playing these songs makes you feel, because they're written in minor keys, they're slow paced, it uses a piano. It's like textbook sort of emotional, melancholic music. And music, in the end, it's all about how an event makes you feel. It basically tells the audience which emotion fits the scenery, which is why just changing the music in a movie clip without changing anything else can evoke a completely different response from the viewer. Contrary to Skyrim, this sad music melancholy isn't tied to anything particular in the game. It plays sometimes in quest hubs, it plays during monolith echoes, and it plays in some zones. And this creates a problem because this makes it very hard to characterize any of the events or echoes or landscapes. Instead, it just plays every now and then. It is seemingly random. But let's assume for now that the music, this sad melancholic stuff, is the main theme of Endgame here. There are, after all, in the Monolith Islands and the End of Time, several songs like this, sort of within the same theme. More often than not, however, the music seems to be written mostly with a certain environment in mind. This whole idea of a coherent theme across the game seems oblivious to the composer. And there are definitely zones, especially in the campaign, where the music makes sense for that specific zone, but it doesn't make sense in the overall game. Because what those tracks usually lack is any sort of resemblance with the other tracks, making them disjointed from the rest of the overall experience. And because of that, the zones also feel disjointed from each other. And that is a real shame, because music can be used as an excellent tool to create this sense that you are in a single world, like in Skyrim or in PoE, even if that world is connected via loading screens. Last Epoch doesn't do that very well, as we are about to see. And you might think that maybe I went to specific places with bad soundtracks or something. That's really not the case. I'm not trying to visit these places and then, come up with this music story afterwards or create a whole music video about this. That is not, who does that, right? That's really not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to provide examples here, and by visiting the zones we're about to visit, I can hopefully make you understand what I mean, what my point is. That's what I'm trying to do here. So for example, we're gonna travel, right, to the Risen Lake. And when you're there, it gives you this almost tribal jungle kind of percussion. And keep in mind what we just heard, right? So it fits the zone, but it's already a pretty big departure from the tracks that we just heard in the End of Time. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but taking too many of these detours and the audience gets lost and loses the musical plot, as it were. I think this is an amazing track, by the way. This is definitely one of the better ones in Last Epoch, in my opinion. Alright, moving on. We're going to the Oracles Abode, which is in the same Imperial era, by the way, it's just in another region. The previous tracks, however, are nowhere to be found. The themes, instruments, sounds and even key we heard before is completely gone. This is another departure entirely, with a guitar, some bells and a complete tonal shift. You could argue this works well within the zone, which I don't think is true at all. But you could also argue the composer is getting a little lost here. How are all of these tracks in the same game? Traveling further to the Majazan Desert, and we're hearing this. This is the same era and the same region as the Oracles Abode, and it is completely different once again. This is a track that actually temporarily stopped me while I was leveling, and I just listened to this and I was honestly wondering what the hell is going on with the music. This to me is really starting to become problematic, because music should help you get immersed into the game, not take you out of the experience. And that's exactly what is happening here. It takes me out of my experience. I'm just leveling, I'm walking across this zone, and then suddenly I hear this. And I'm like, what the heck is even going on here? We're not done yet. We're entering the Wraith Dunes, which is the next zone, and I'm just going to play the music to you. I think this is an incredibly poorly produced song. It's just very poor overall. Instruments are badly mixed, it's hurting your ears, and it stands out for all the wrong reasons. You don't want to hear this under any circumstances pretty much. I'm honestly clueless as to why this is even in the game. And this brings me to another song. This is a small subjective intermezzo, and we're talking now about the Orbis song, which to a lesser extent has the same issues. is no rhyme or reason to any of this song. It is a rhapsody of different styles, composed almost chaotically, and I'm completely lost here what the purpose of this song is or how it is supposed to make you feel. If this would play in a psychological horror movie, I guess that would make sense. But I was hoping for a bit more of an epic score here, with a recognizable theme that could be reused across different Orbis fights. How cool would it be if you have a good song here with a simple theme but recognizable theme, which would differ slightly just in melody or instruments used depending on the version of the shade that you're fighting. Fighting fire, get some wood instruments in there. You're fighting the ice version, maybe something more metallic like an electric guitar. Void, maybe a choir of sorts. And then when the real Orbis enters, which we haven't seen yet because this is just a shade, you get the culmination of those soundtracks in an overarching theme that will use components of the previous tracks. There's no way this current song is going to pull it off because the song itself seems to be composed by two people who couldn't settle on the outcome. End of the intermezzo. This is pretty much the issue, right? There's no coherent theme going on there, and I can see how this might end up being a very controversial video with somewhat of a subjective subject, but I do feel the music department really needs to start figuring out what sort of feelings they want to evoke from the players, and then start writing a coherent original soundtrack using similar instruments, using similar keys, similar chords, and stop trying to make tracks that really stand out or something. But instead create an overall vision on the music and then stick to that vision to give the game an identity on the musical side of things. It's difficult to do, it's not the top priority, I'm sure, but I hope I showed how other games really elevate gameplay experiences by incorporating great background music, and I really wish Last Epoch would be able to do the same thing over time. That is the main reason that I'm making this video, because sure, I turn off the music as well nowadays while playing, but I wish that wouldn't be necessary. And that's it. If you have any questions or remarks, put them in the comments down below. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did and you want more like this, consider liking the video or even subscribing. And if you really like the video and you want to support the channel, you can grab a YouTube membership for $2, which gets you absolutely nothing, but shows your very much appreciated love and support. You can also check out my Nexus store, link in the card and description, where I'm selling a few of my favorite games. And if you buy those, I get a small cut. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. Love you all. See you soon. Bye bye.